Hello, Shelly Ramus, Volunteer Specialist with the Iowa 4-H Youth Development Program. This week's video, we want to highlight the online version of this year's annual leader training, 4-H Builds Resilience, for our volunteers. As many of you know, 4-H Builds Resilience, the face-to-face version of this training, has been going on the last several months in many of your counties, and there are likely many offerings of the face-to-face version of this year's annual leader training scheduled in the next weeks and months to come. However, we know that not all of our volunteers are able to attend an in-person training, and we need all of our volunteers that are direct and ongoing to attend the annual leader training as a required part of their volunteer role. So we create an online version of the training each year. This year's 4-H Builds Resilience online version is now available for our volunteers to complete, and it's available via 4-H Online. I'm going to walk through a few of the steps and tips to highlight to help your volunteers access the training in 4-H Online, hopefully helping you to help your volunteers with that information, as well as some of the help sheets and some of the information that I sent out in the email a few weeks ago. So let's go ahead and take a look. To start, I'm going to briefly highlight some of the main points from the email I sent a few weeks ago regarding face-to-face entry for this year's 4-H Builds Resilience training, as well as information for the online version. So under the first bullet point, you have information regarding entering that face-to-face entry into 4-H Online. All of our volunteers who've attended 4-H Builds Resilience in the in-person face-to-face version, those need to be entered into 4-H Online in order for us to be able to track that they've completed the training. We also have a 4-H Online help sheet for staff to help you walk through this process and enter those face-to-face entries if this is something that's new or you need a refresher on that information. The link is in the email, and I'm also going to briefly walk through that help sheet here in a little bit. The second bullet point talks about information and resources that you can find in My Extension. The first document is Staff Instructions and Protocol for Missing Volunteer Training. It outlines instructions for you to follow for those that have missed the training. The second document is an alternative email that you can choose to use or use parts of to provide information to be sent out to those volunteers who you know need to still complete the training, to let them know about the online version of the training. The third bullet point highlights where you as staff can access and go through the online version of 4-H Builds Resilience in the ISU Extension and Outreach Moodle under our 4-H courses. If you'd like to preview the online version of this year's annual leader training, you're welcome to do so via Moodle. One thing to stress is that we do want to make sure our volunteers are taking the online version of this year's annual leader training in 4-H Online. As I mentioned, I wanted to point out and highlight the 4-H Online help sheet for staff entering attendance from a face-to-face training into 4-H Online. You see the help sheet in front of you. As I'm talking, you can kind of see the different steps. You can access this help sheet in My Extension. This help sheet will walk you through how to correctly enter face-to-face training attendance for your volunteers in 4-H Online. I'm going to go ahead next and walk through a view of what it will look like for a volunteer to log into 4-H Online and access the annual leader training 4-H Builds Resilience online version. I'm going to use one of our demo volunteer sign-ins and log in as that volunteer. So your volunteers will just log into 4-H Online as they normally do. They'll come to this screen and they need to click Continue to Family. From here, you can see this is our demo family, so these aren't real volunteers, but our demo family, and I'm in as Jermaine Johnson, so I'm going to go over to his name, and I'm going to click on the Edit button. From here, I'm able to see my profile information, and then up top, you'll see a training option. So the volunteer needs to go ahead and click on the training option, and then they're able to see the trainings that they've either completed or they've began to take. You can see that this year's annual leader training 4-H Builds Resilience is not there because they haven't taken it yet, so they need to click the Sign Up for Trainings option. There they will see other volunteer trainings that they have access to, including this year's 4-H Builds Resilience online version training. They'll go ahead and click on that. Once they do that, they can again click on the title of the training, and the training opens up for them. Your volunteer will need to go through and complete the entire training. Once they close out of the training from the last slide, their certificate will be right here below where you see the title of the training. But they need to complete the entire training in order to be able to access that certificate. When they click on the certificate, that is what tracks it in 4-H Online. Staff do not need to enter completion of the online training for volunteers. When the volunteer clicks on that certificate, that is what saves that to their training history in 4-H Online. I want to take a second and go back and highlight bullet point number 2 and the second document that this bullet point talks about, the Alternative Volunteer Training email document. This also includes step-by-step instructions for the volunteers to access the online version of the Annual Leader Training in 4-H Online. Very similar to what I just walked you through, but in a text version. So if you send that email, send that information via email to your volunteers, they'll have that step-by-step instruction.